In 1492, when Christopher Columbus and his crew first set foot on the sandy shores of the Bahamas, they believed they had reached the golden gateways of the Orient. They were searching for the legendary spices of India and the heavy gold of emperors, but instead they encountered a tall, vibrant green grass bearing heavy golden ears of grain. The local Taino people called this sacred plant maize. To the eyes of the travel-worn Spanish sailors, it seemed like a simple, primitive native grain, a curious novelty. They had absolutely no idea that they were looking at the most sophisticated feat of genetic engineering in the ancient world, a crop that would go on to conquer the global food supply. But corn's spectacular journey does not begin with the arrival of Spanish caravels. It begins more than 9,000 years earlier, in a humid, hidden river valley on the other side. Deep in the central Balsas river valley of southwestern Mexico, a wild, scraggly grass known as Balsas Teosinte grew wild along the riverbanks. It is from this humble weed that all modern maize descended. If you were to look at teosinte today, you would never guess it had any connection to corn. It has tiny, rock-hard ears containing barely a dozen grains, wrapped in a flinty casing so tough. Yet, more than 8,700 years ago, ancient hunter-gatherers in this lowland seasonal forest began a miraculous partnership with this plant. Pioneering archaeologists Anthony Ranier and Dolores Pipinero discovered the earliest physical evidence of this domestication, finding microscopic maize sturge grains. These early farmers cleared forests, burned plots to create agricultural space, and patiently selected seeds from the strongest grasses. It was the quiet birth of a botanical revolution. However, the massive, highly productive yellow ears we recognize today were not created overnight. For thousands of years, corn remained a relatively small, localized lowland crop. The turning point that allowed corn to conquer the Americas occurred just over 5,000 years ago in central Mexico. There, lowland domesticated maize hybridized with a completely different second species. Genetic research led by Jeffrey Ross Ibarra at UC Davis has revealed that about 20% of the entire genome of all modern maize worldwide comes from this single Highland Teosinte species. This hybridization introduced genes that dramatically increased cob size and altered flowering times. It gave the tropical crop a surge of hybrid vigor and the genetic tools necessary to tolerate cooler climates and grow at higher latitudes with longer days. Armed with this new Highland DNA, corn exploded across the continent. As corn swept across the Americas, it became the literal and spiritual flesh of the civilizations that grew alongside it. For the Maya, corn was not merely a food crop, it was the very substance of humanity. Their sacred creation account, preserved in the 16th century Popol Vuh, tells of the dawning of the world when the creators repeatedly failed to fashion humans out of mud and wood. The Maya truly believed they were the people of corn, bound in an eternal covenant of blood and seed with their crop. They personified the plant as a vital spiritual force. Worshipping the beautiful tonsured maize god, often identified as First Father Hun Hunahpu, who represented the wet season of growth and agricultural rebirth. Classic Maya art is filled with depictions of this deity dancing, playing the sacred ball game, and triumphantly resurrecting from the shell of a giant cosmic turtle floating on primordial waters. To sustain their massive urban populations, Mesoamerican farmers developed the Milpa, an agricultural masterpiece of biodiversity. Instead of planting vast, empty fields of a single crop, they cultivated the three sisters: corn, climbing beans, and sprawling squash. In this brilliant ecological polyculture, the corn grew tall to act as a living trellis for the beans. The beans climbed the stalks and pumped vital nitrogen, and the squash spread its broad, prickly leaves. This highly sustainable system provided a completely balanced diet. The corn supplied carbohydrates, while the beans provided the essential amino acids to form a complete protein. The security and massive surplus food provided by the Milpa became the physical foundation on which Mesoamerican cultures flourished, freeing people to focus on art, politics, complex hieroglyphic writing. But behind this miracle grain lay a dangerous, hidden biological trap. Raw corn is chemically stingy. Its vital nutrients, specifically niacin, vitamin B3, and the essential amino acid tryptophan, are locked tight inside the grain's tough cell walls, entirely inaccessible. A human population attempting to survive on a monotonous diet of raw, untreated corn would eventually waste away from severe malnutrition. The alkaline cooking unlocked the bound niacin and liberated the tryptophan. It also boosted the corn's calcium content by an astonishing 750. This softened corn could then be ground into a smooth, cohesive dough called masa. But the real magic was nutritional. This simple chemical bath worked wonders on a molecular level. The alkalinity dissolved the hemicellulose glue. The term comes from the Nahuatl word Nixtamali. Ancient cooks, dating back at least 3,200 years, soaked and boiled dried corn kernels. Mesoamericans solved this silent threat with an ingenious chemical hack called Nixtamalization. But their cultural ignorance led them to completely abandon the Nixtamalization recipe. They dry milled corn using their traditional wheat mills. By the 18th century, corn had become the ultimate peasant food, spreading through Spain, northern Italy, fueling a massive global population boom. Soon, Spanish ships carried the high-yielding crop across the Atlantic, where it spread like wildfire. Corn was a dream crop for European landholders. When the Spanish conquistadors, led by Hernán Cortés, shattered the Aztec Empire in 1519, they marveled at the sprawling markets of Tenochtitlan. By the mid-1700s, poor peasant populations in Europe, who relied on corn as their sole cheap staple food, began falling ill with a terrifying, inexplicable disease. First diagnosed in Spain in 1735 by physician Gaspar Casal, it became known in northern Italy as Pellagra, derived from the regional Italian words pelle agra, meaning rough skin. Pellagra was a slow, agonizing descent that ravaged the body and mind through what doctors grimly classified as the 4 Ds: dermatitis, diarrhea, dementia, and death. Because the scientific community was swept up in the triumphs of germ theory, they convinced themselves that pellagra was an infectious disease. By the turn of the 20th century, the pellagra epidemic crossed the Atlantic and struck the American South with devastating force. It ravaged the poorest pockets of the rural South: sharecroppers, cotton mill workers, coal miners, and orphans. In 1914, as asylums and hospitals in the South overflowed, the U.S. government tasked a brilliant Hungarian-born epidemiologist named Dr. Joseph Goldberger. Goldberger toured the affected Southern institutions and noticed a glaring anomaly. While orphans and patients were suffering, the doctors and wealthy wardens never fell ill. In 1915, to prove his hypothesis, Goldberger conducted a famous experiment on 12 healthy prisoners. Yet, the Southern medical establishment and politicians, proud and fiercely defensive of their region's reputation, rejected Goldberger's findings. In a final, astonishing act of scientific courage in 1916, Goldberger, his assistant George Wheeler, and even his own wife decided to prove the disease was non-infectious. They injected themselves with blood drawn from dying pellagra patients, rubbed throat secretions, and even swallowed capsules. Not a single participant contracted the disease. Goldberger had proved his point beyond a shadow of a doubt. Pellagra was finally eradicated in the American South by 1945, not through a return to the ancient art of nixtamalization, but through federal mandates. With the mid-20th century advent of hybrid breeding and synthetic chemical fertilizers, corn yields reached dizzying heights. Today, corn has conquered the planet on a scale that is almost impossible to comprehend, with over 1.2 billion metric tons harvested every single year.
But the way we consume this ancient grain has changed fundamentally. If you walk down the aisles of a modern supermarket, you might believe you are looking at a vast, diverse array of different foods.
In reality, you are walking through a massive processed temple of corn. Up to 90% of the corn grown today is completely dismantled by industrial wet milling factories. It is transformed into high fructose corn syrup, which sweetens our sodas, breads, and processed snacks. It is turned into cornstarch. Furthermore, our modern livestock industry is entirely propped up by corn. Millions of tons of cheap yellow dent corn are fed to cattle, pigs. Even our cars run on corn, with roughly 40% of the entire United States corn crop currently distilled into bioethanol.
Yet this global industrial conquest has come at a staggering ecological cost. Monoculture fields of genetically uniform corn stretch for millions of uninterrupted acres.
The chemical runoff from these industrial fields flows down rivers and empties into the ocean, creating a massive, suffocating dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. The beautifully balanced, highly biodiverse Milpa system that once nourished empires for thousands of years in perfect harmony has been replaced. In the end, the history of corn is a story of a double conquest. It is the story of a humble, rocky wildgrass. Corn didn't just conquer the Americas, it conquered us.